My name's Simon Rogers. I edit the Guardian's DataBlog and Data Store, and I guess I'm the closest thing we've got to a data editor here.
Okay, lovely. And so, if you walk in the door and you've got a story that you need to start working on, what's the daily work of a data journalist nowadays?
It really varies. I mean, a lot of the work we do is just about getting the data out there into the world. So we kind of spend a lot of time, cleaning up and making data accessible, and a lot of kind of boring, tedious stuff. If you think like it could be a third of what you're doing is actually just making the data, getting it in a state so you can do some analysis and work on it. And a lot of the data we get is published on PDFs, which is the world's least accessible format. So we spend a lot of time just getting that data into ways that we can use it. I suppose it's then kind of integrating it into the whole operation of the Guardian, from talking to the newspaper desk, talking to people on the site, working out when it's going to go live. Are we going to put it live on the website first? What are we going to do with it? Are we going to work with the graphics team on making it a graphic, or is it something that's more about getting the numbers out there and doing kind of number analysis?
So how technical is the job? I mean, did you come in knowing how to do these things, or is it very much learning? Because it's an open source format. There's a new format every day. So do you have to learn these day to day, or do you kind of have a broad basis anyway?
I mean, I don't know. My feeling about a lot of this stuff is that actually it's much better to approach it as a journalist. My background is as a news editor. I was a news editor on the paper, and I feel like I don't want to become a programmer. And my job is really to look at that data and ask it kind of journalistic questions. In the same way you'd ask a source, any source, you'd ask that source kind of journalistic questions. You'd interrogate it, and that's how I treat the data. So I can't program. I can use Excel pretty well, but I'm lucky because here at the Guardian we've got people who can do coding and scraping and a lot of that sort of stuff that I can kind of get when I need them. But what I don't want to happen is that I end up spending so much time worrying about programming that I don't look at the data properly. And it's really important that you kind of treat that data just like you treat a source or any other piece of information. You have to not be intimidated by it and work out what you want to know about it and just find out what the answer is. So when we first got the WikiLeaks data, the first one we were looking at was Afghanistan, and there it was actually the smallest of the data releases. It was only 92,000 items, only. And so what we knew there was that, IED attacks are going to be the big thing. So IEDs are improvised explosive devices. Somebody digs a hole by the side of the road, fills it up with explosive. And those attacks have really increased. That was our impressions. We thought, let's see if that was the case. So what we did was we just filtered out everything else apart from IED attacks. And the thing about the WikiLeaks data is it was really well structured, so it makes that whole process a lot simpler. And so we just looked at IED attacks, and then when we thought, what can we do? And the great thing about WikiLeaks data, again, is you've got incredibly detailed geolocation data, so you know exactly where every incident happens, so you can start to map things out, and you can start, and because you've got date and time as well, you can see the frequency and so on. So you're starting to think, okay, so if it's IED attacks, if that is the theme, and that does seem to be the major cause of death there, then what can you show about that? We can show where it happened, when it happened. You can show who was most affected, have casualty rates and so on. So it's that kind of breakdown. So I suppose what it is asking, just asking the data small questions that you can get the answer to at first, and then moving on from that. If you just sit there thinking, this is a whole lot of data, it's just too intimidating to move. But what you've got to do is almost like break it down into the small things that you can actually ask and the small things that you can work out.
So what comes first, the data or the story? Or does it depend on what the story is?
I think it's really what we do is we try and hook a lot of the data. For us, it's hooked around news stories. So we'll think of the question we've got to ask, and then we'll go and look at the data and find out. Now, what we've had recently is the government, and lots of governments have released shed loads of data out there into the world. So, for instance, we now know every item of government spending by every department over £25,000. We think the government spends nearly £700 billion a year. £25,000 is a lot of items. So sometimes when you get that much data, you have to look at how you filter it down and make it, and how you aggregate stuff, how you pull stuff together to make stuff easy for reporters to understand and ask questions of data. It's all about storytelling, really. Just as much as it was in James Cameron's day or John Pilger, the work that he does is telling stories, or the stuff that Maggie O'Kane does, when she goes and tells amazing stories. It's just telling stories with data. It's using that information to do a very typical journalistic thing.
So it's a journalist first and then a data journalist second, if you see what I mean. So it's essentially a journalist with who works with stats more often than other journalists.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, it's just another tool. When I started working, I was the only person in my office to have a computer. And when I was at City, we didn't get taught how to use computers, so sounds amazing now, doesn't it? And then, but can you imagine we didn't have access to the internet? Okay, so now, can you imagine a reporter not having access to the internet? It's just another tool, that's all it is. And if you kind of set your face against that, say, well, numbers aren't for me, then you're just missing out on a whole load of stories and ways of looking at the world. You know, if you went to interview Ed Miliband, say, wouldn't it be good to know what kind of constituency he looks after? And then how are you going to find that out if you can't look at the data? You know, how are you going to know how many unemployed people there are, or the ethnic breakdown, or the age breakdown, or whatever? And that's where it kind of gets useful.
So what makes the Guardian data store so successful? I mean, I reference it all the time. People go to it as the place to be really for data journalism at the moment.
I think it's just dumb luck, really, in the sense we were the first people to do this stuff. It's not rocket science. It's not particularly complicated what we do. Actually, I think it's just obvious to me that we should be doing it. I mean, it started because I was news editor. I said, now I started working with the graphics team an awful lot about producing graphics. I started collecting data sets, and when we launched the Guardian Open platform, I thought, well, I've got like 200 or 300 decent, interesting data sets there, from carbon emissions through to victims of the war in Afghanistan. So why not just put that stuff online and see if people use it? And we thought it'd be developers and techies and people like that using it, but actually it's real people out there in the real world who want to know. Want to know what the carbon emissions of their country are, or want to know what divorce rates are, which is something we just put up today, or whatever. It's just so we're becoming a source of data now, which is a really interesting position to be in. And so, what it is to be a journalist starts to change, doesn't it? It becomes
you're the source.
Yeah, exactly. We're the source, but also we're kind of a bridge for people between the people who produce the data and are just appalling at explaining it, and the people out there in the world who want to understand it. And we're that bridge.
So what next? What's the next big move? Can you see some more dumps of data coming from WikiLeaks, or what you can expand?
WikiLeaks has changed the world, and data, and is as part of the reason it's changed the world is because of data journalism, because people are only able to tell that story by using the kind of techniques of data journalism. So I think it's made newsrooms realise that if they don't have data journalists employed, they're going to be missing out. So I kind of think next thing there's going to be a lot more competition. And I think also it's going to be a lot more about who's trusted with the data, and it's not necessarily going to be the major news organisations that can win that, because there are lots of other websites out there who are doing interesting things, and becoming a reliable source of data. I mean, there's a site called Where's My Money Go, which is a really great place to look for public spending data, but in a broken down in a really simple way, and people like that are doing a better job than the traditional media outlets. The BBC isn't ruling in this world, neither is the Telegraph or the Times, and we're just in a good position because we were first, and we've had some brilliant, amazing stories which have only existed because of the work we've done. And so it's just keeping that lead. It's going to be really important for us, and it's not going to be easy, I think.